Good morning, good afternoon. Thank you for joining the DCSA webinar. Today we're going to talk about the just-in-time port call standards that we released a couple weeks ago. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Marcel.
Thank you, Ellen, and good morning and good afternoon, depending on which time zone you're in, to all of you. My name is Marcel van der Pol. As Ellen said, I'm one of the two program directors within DCSA, and specifically the Just-in-Time port call program is one of my responsibilities. So for the upcoming 40 minutes, I'm going to talk to you about DCSA. Where we come from and why we're here. And then I want to take you through the reasons that we, together with our members, have decided to make the port call optimization one of DCSA's focus topics, and then follow up with taking you through our first release. And that leaves us, if it all goes well, around 15 minutes for the Q&A. But let's go. First, about DCSA, the Digital Container Shipping Association. I'm actually mentioning it out loud because our members, the shipping industry, they got together, it was somewhere in 2018, and they realized that they needed to digitalize the industry. But they also knew that all the individual initiatives that they had done so far didn't lead to enough. When coming together, they decided, okay, let's organize something jointly that on our behalf, with our mandate, with our support, can really drive us in this digitization of the entire container shipping industry. Hence, DCSA was born April 2019. We were formally founded. Our mandate was, as I just said, digitization of the global container shipping industry. And we got additional directives. Our members told us that no matter what, we should always be vendor neutral. So you're never going to see us endorse a specific vendor. We should always, we're an association, we're non-for-profit. And last but certainly not least, everything we do is open source. So where we feel that digitization always needs standardization, all the standards that we publish are open source and available and usable for everyone. And that's good. And that's also a mandate that allows us to talk with as many industry stakeholders that we see and that we can reach out to, because we know we're not alone in industry. And here is what schematics of the organizations that we speak with. Going from the top left are the authorities, regulatory bodies, but also standards bodies. They are our customers, the customers of our members, the shippers and the freight forwarders. Then the solution providers. They know the industry, they work very closely with the carriers, and the logistic participants, and specifically for this program, very important, the ports and the terminals. I'm gonna talk you through them. And first, the standards bodies. What we did when we started with this program, we looked outside and we saw standards bodies and we saw the work that they've done. And we decided that some of that work made perfect sense. It was just really good. So when we started working on the timestamps, we reached out to the IMO, reached out to the ITPCO, and we've collaborated heavily on the work that they'd already done. We fine-tuned them a bit to get them ready for implementation, but we really co-created it together with them. One of the other logos that you see, TIC 4.0, representative body for some of the global terminal operators. We brought them into the discussion. They've endorsed our standards as well. So it's really about working with other organizations. And we know that for protocol optimization to be successful, specifically for this program, we need to work just as closely as we work with our members. We need to work with the ports, and we need to work with the terminal operators, and via the ports with other key nautical service providers. So in this program, we talk with them on a global scale. And I will discuss with you later how we envision this sort of end game where all the stakeholders in this protocol ecosystem, they work together. And I'm going to talk to the advantages that I see that's in there for everyone involved. For now, what do we see as the drivers behind the protocol optimization program? Now, we know that the current process isn't good enough. We know that as an industry, our waste and carbon emissions, they're higher than they can be. And we know that our schedule reliability is limited. Now, the question, of course, is how is that possible? And the DCSA research has identified three key causes for this suboptimality. One is a lack of standardized data. Two is a lack of transparency. And three is a lack of system interoperability. And then the question, of course, is, we know all this, but why would it be necessary for us to improve on that process? And I think there are two key reasons for that. One is the emissions that we just talked about. From the IMO, there was set a very ambitious target. And the target says that compared to the 2008 numbers, the greenhouse gas reduction in 2030 should be 40%, and in 2050, it should be 70%. Now, those are pretty steep numbers. But about 3 weeks ago, the European Commission sort of topped that. And they said that, you know what, we feel that compared to the 28 numbers, by 2030, the container industry should have a reduction of 50% of greenhouse gases. So that's an additional challenge to what's already laying ahead of us. The second reason why we should improve is actually the customers of our members, the shippers. And in the second quarter of this year, we've reached out to North American shippers with a survey. And the question we put forward to them was, how likely would you be to switch to carriers or to service providers who could provide each of the following? And you see it in front of you. We asked them several questions. And the top three that said that if you can give me this, I will very likely switch, is all about schedule reliability. It's the confidence in the arrival time. It is in general that knowing when your shipment arrives, even when it arrives later than originally planned, is super important for the shippers. And it makes sense. Shippers have just-in-time logistic processes as well for their factories or their stores. And those processes are negatively impacted every time that a shipment comes later than communicated. Okay, so DCSA envisions that we move from the current analog environment to a digital just-in-time protocol, where we do have transparent communication, where we do have reduced waste and emissions, and where we do have an improved schedule reliability. And in general, what we're aiming for is a more harmonic ecosystem that includes all the main actors in the shipping industry. Okay, we know the issue, we know what our shippers expect from us, and we have this vision. Then the question is, what can we do to create a successful just-in-time protocol? We see three things. The first one is one language spoken by all the stakeholders on a global scale. The second is digital data sharing, real time when necessary, based on that one language. And then the third is the IT construct to support the digital data sharing. What we have done for our first release is focusing on that first item, one language for key events. And let me take you through this slide, which I realize is a bit full. On the top level, horizontally, you see the high-level end-to-end port call process. And that's the process that begins with a planning for a berth arrival, the planning for the arrival at the pilot boarding place. Then the work starts with actually arriving at the pilot boarding place and the actual start of the cargo operations. Then planning again, this time for cargo completion and port departure, and then the actual cargo completion and berth departure. Now, throughout this process, we have created 17 timestamps. 5 are for the actual events, and you see them in yellow, and 12 are for planning activities around those actual events. And let me give you an example. Take ETA berth. Of course, we knew that there were a lot of possibilities. How do you define the actual time of arrival at the berth? And together with our members, we said, okay, we're gonna, because when we talked about with our members, we had different definitions in use already with our members. Reaching out to the terminals, same thing. What we choose is, for now, the actual time of arrival at berth is your first line ashore. Actual time of your start of cargo operations, we choose that it's the first commercial lift. So we've really delved into what exactly is behind that data definition. What you also see indicated here is the data owner for each and every of those timestamps. And it can be the carrier, that can be the port, and it can be the terminal. We've done that to stress the importance that we attach to a data owner. Specifically when the data is shared digitally, it is so important that the owner must and always will be able to decide who has access to my data, when, under which conditions, etc. So data ownership for us is one of the key elements when we want to move forward. Final remark on this slide. It is, as I said early on as well, it's a high-level description, and more granularity is possible and is actually welcome. And moving forward, we will work on that. What we will also be doing is balancing there between the need for standards that work everywhere, and we need to acknowledge the fact that there are differences between the way that individual ports and terminals and carriers work, and that we need to respect those differences. So moving forward with the other stakeholders, we will be able to decide what is the right balance between granular standardization and local flexibility. A word on process waste. Ultimately, the goal is to eliminate waste as much as is needed. And that's an important distinction, because waste is not always a bad thing. But first, let me take you through the three types of waste. We have waiting time. Vessel arrives at the port according to schedule, but then has to wait. Second is idle time. Vessel is alongside the berth, cargo operations haven't started yet, or cargo operations actually have finished, but the vessel can't leave yet. These two specifically are forms of waste that directly contribute to higher than necessary emissions. Because if the carrier had known in advance that he should have waited, he could have adjusted its speed en route to the port. Now the third one is delay. That's a slightly different one, and the delay is the time that cargo operations take longer than originally expected. So note that in these three categories of waste, there is a part that isn't necessarily bad. So for instance, in terms of waiting time, it just might happen that a carrier purposely creates waiting time for an individual vessel because it, at the end of the day, benefits its global operations. Same goes for idle time. That can also and sometimes must be used for activities with regard to, for instance, preparations of cargo operations or preparations for departure. So what we will ultimately do is we're going to focus on eliminating the undesired waste. Now, something that I promised you I would get back to you, and that is the sort of coming together of what we just discussed. The one language spoken across all the stakeholders on a global scale, the digital data sharing, the IT construct to support that, and this ecosystem where everyone works together. There is a benefit in it for everyone, from left to right. If we take for the carriers, we just discussed, you can adjust your vessel speed. There is, you can lower your CO2 emissions. You can improve on your schedule reliability. For terminals, you can optimize your berth productivity. For your port authorities, you can optimize the local port processes. So there's something in there that is key for everyone, and that is how it should be. Because in this ecosystem, there is no one player that can enforce its will on other players. This is something that we need to want together. One remark with regard to the IT construct to support this data sharing. We don't know yet which one is the best IT construct. We know that APIs will surely play a role in connecting operation centers with your terminal operating systems, with your port community systems. But will that connection be one-on-one? Will it be via a data hub? All sorts of other questions. That is something that we want to identify together with the other stakeholders moving forward. This slide actually is the last slide from a content perspective. And moving forward, I would like to spend some time on your feedback. Right after the webinar, you have time to fill out a survey. In terms of staying updated, there's our LinkedIn profile that you can follow. And there you can also subscribe to our monthly updates. Specific attention maybe to the reference user group. And that is an initiative that we started last week. The idea behind it is we got lots of questions from the industry as a whole. Can we follow you better? Can we participate? I've got some ideas. Are you open for it? And we thought we needed to do something with that. So we started this initiative, the reference user group, and we're still building it. We're still detailing it. And we're also going to ask you for your input as to how would you want to see it happen. If you want to join the reference user group, please reach out to us. And we're more than happy to continue this with you. All right, that leaves us good time for the questions and answers. And for that, I will also bring back Ellen and Henning.
Sounds good. So Henning and Marcel, if you want to turn on your camera, this will be a good time to do so.
Yeah.
All right. So again, just a reminder, there is a questions tab in your panel. You can type it in and we'll be able to go through these questions one by one. So I have a couple that have come in so far. Let me start with the first one. This one is a question about the standards. You mentioned we're collaborating with other standards bodies, and some of them have published quite a lot of work. So what is DCSA doing on the just-in-time port call standards beyond what's already being done by other standards bodies?
Yeah, that's a good question. What we've seen with the standards that have been developed, and that also goes for other initiatives, is that they tended to stay at either the more sort of theoretical level, good standards, but no one was implementing them, or that they were implemented on a very local or regional scale. What we want to do is to have standards implemented on a global scale. So not just between brackets in one port, or maybe a sequence of 2 or 3 ports with the terminals there and other stakeholders, but truly on a global scale, in Asia, in North America, in Europe, in Africa, in South America. You get the idea. So the main difference is twofold. One, it's there to be implemented, and the second one is it's on a global scale.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to insert one question that came in that's related to that one. Have you engaged with IPCSA?
We did, but not yet on a detailed level. So what we've done, and sort of the order of things, we first looked with this one language, we first looked at it with our members, and we reached out to individual organizations like individual ports, and we reached out to TIC 4.0. And what we now do is reaching out to other organizations as well, moving forward into this situation where we can really implement it on a larger scale live. And that's when we're going to also talk to those organizations as IPCSA.
Okay. Can you just talk a bit more about how DCSA will collaborate with ports and terminals?
Yeah. What we have in mind is that you can call it a pilot, I suppose, that we run a pilot with terminals and ports from multiple continents. And we are talking to specific ports and terminals on a global level in, as I said, Asia right now, Europe, North America just starting. What we want to do is we want to create this group that first agrees on the one language. I think we're there. And that then agrees, okay, how are we going to digitally share that data? And that's not necessarily easy, because the fact that we have now one language also means that all the languages are no longer needed. And that means basically that every stakeholder in his or her systems needs to adjust to the new language insofar that it hasn't been already done. So that's the first thing we want to do, allow everyone that wants to join to adapt to that new language. And then the second step will be, okay, how are we going to digitally share that data from a IT perspective, but also from a, what we just discussed, data owner perspective. What makes sense, which data not, etc. So that's how we want to involve more ports and terminals. And luckily enough, we are talking to a lot of them already.
Okay, great, thanks. I have one question here that I'm actually going to ask Henning to respond, because we've heard this in other sessions too. It's less about this standard specifically. So the question is, your listed members are large global carriers, and what is the role and the importance of smaller, small medium-sized carriers in this project being a success? And are they also on board? So there is a question specifically about this project, but I know we've been asked about that quite a lot. So you want to take that first?
Let me try to answer that, Ellen, as good as possible. So I mean, first of all, in this initiative, we have all our members involved, which is also not always the case. So some of them, we only have parts of our members participating. However, we have so far not involved further carriers which are not members of DCSA. But as Marcel pointed out in the beginning, our publications are open source, and we believe that this ecosystem we are trying to build here to really, let's say, move the global port approach for containerized vessels to the next layer or to the next level requires industry-wide adoption. So it only works if you don't make it a closed shop, but you share it openly, and you enable other carriers as well, but also other ports to join. The question, especially if you look at the initiatives that have been working on this so far, is how do you reach, let's say, the right size or significant size so that the whole thing can take off by itself? And so far, this has not happened. And this is what we are trying. So we are trying to reach a scale which, on the one hand side, makes it visible. What is the benefit in it for all? And Marcel elaborated a little bit. So we see that there are positive impacts in it for everyone who's participating in this thing, including the shippers. I think we should also exaggerate that point, because it could improve the schedule reliability of scheduled services. So there is benefit in it, but we have to make that more obvious. And the other thing is that if you look at it from a carrier perspective, you can't deal with hundreds of local solutions. So there is an interest in standardization and having similar mechanisms, ideally the same mechanisms for port approaches all around the globe. And this is something where we believe if we reach a certain scale, we will see solutions that are supporting this. And these solutions are, of course, there for our members, but also for smaller carriers. And this is where I see them benefiting from the initiative.
Okay. Marcel, do you have anything to add there?
No.
Okay. All right. Here's one more question. I think start with you on this, Marcel. What is your vision on the future standards development with regards to variability factors such as vessel size, port reliability, and weather influence?
Yeah, fair point. Somewhere in the presentation, I mentioned that we need to balance between the need for standardization and the need for flexibility. And vessel size is one of those elements that you know that it just makes a difference. And I can't give a fixed answer to that, because I really think it depends really on the topic. What we'll do is when something like this arises, be it vessel size or any other element that can play a role, is that we're going to talk to the stakeholders and we're going to get their experiences and their insights and their opinions to try to find that balance between, yeah, I mean, we just have to standardize this, and we know that some people or some organizations will have to adapt, but it's just going to work better, versus this is just going to stifle local activities too much. We need to stay away from it. So I know it's a fairly generic answer, Alan.
I can try to maybe add one or two comments to this one. So what we are trying to set up is a digital planning and replanning process for a port call. And this is, I think, what we have seen in many other areas that have been digitized. If you do it manually and you have to create situation awareness with multiple stakeholders, like in this case, it's not only port, terminal, and the carrier or the ship operator. There are also all the hinterland connections. There are tugboats, there are pilots. So it's multiple parties that need to be involved. If you do it in the classical way, you tend to not do so many iterations. It's just too time consuming to make it happen. If we are successful in reaching a digitized planning and replanning process, we can run it in an easy way without that much effort more frequently. And that would give us a lever to react on a weather situation or a port congestion, because it's just easier to replan. And so what we are seeking is, we believe, especially if it's about waiting time, so the better we know when the berth will really be available, we can just give a heads up to the vessel to allow the vessel to adjust the speed. And this is one element. And maybe Marcel, you wanna answer. There's another question on the delay ways that you were talking about a couple of slides ago, which is in sometimes also caused by the carrier, because if the volume of requested cargo operations in the forecast is very much different from what you actually want to unload or discharge when you arrive at the port, there's necessarily a delay in the port operations.
Yeah, true. And that's something we got back when we spoke with terminals. They said, yeah, I mean, we get that we as terminals can play a role in providing better and more timely information. But hey, we've got something for you carriers as well. And this is the one of the examples that they came up with. DCSA is also working on the baseline and load list standardizations. And that is something that we want to incorporate in this entire ecosystem of data sharing. So we're looking at 17 timestamps now, but in the future, we want to also insert things like a load list and a baseline into that communication, so that the vessel or the operations center from the carrier can actually, in a timely manner, get the correct information to, in this particular case, terminal, so that the terminal can actually already get the berth in order with all the right equipment in terms of volume and capability, etc.
Okay.
Here's another one for you, Marcel.
Yeah.
What challenges do you see in getting this standardization adopted by relevant stakeholders?
A few. For starters, we see the willingness. There is no one saying, really? Digital data sharing? Why? So that's not the issue. The issue is in the fact that lots of things are now being done in an analog way. So when you go from fax and email and phone to full digital data sharing, that's a big step. And therefore, you first need to create the right mindset. You need to want to invest in the IT construct, whichever that's going to be, that is necessary to support that. And you need the willingness to really overcome some of your mindset that is based on, hey, but that's just how we do it here. To want to adhere to, okay, but this is how we're going to do it on a global scale. So at the end of the day, everyone that is involved actually benefits. It may be good to mention that within DCSA, and you know that, Henning, we've already identified this is not something that we're going to finish in 2020 or 2021. It's a longer term program, especially if you do it on a global scale, to at the end of the day insert in your ecosystem all those relevant ports and terminals and carriers for that matter.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. So it's the good thing is that we believe we can scale it up from a small number of ports and terminals and carriers involved to a larger scale. There's another question which also points into the direction, yeah, it's also, let's say, carefully asked, but let me just cite it. It may be a draft question, but does the success of the project partly rely on carriers, ports, and terminals having the right technology and platforms in place in order to share data efficiently or effectively?
So there's a bit of a yes and a bit of a no. Obviously, if you all have the right technology, then really cool, because it's easier. But define right. I mentioned somewhere in the presentation talking about APIs to connect port community systems and terminal operating system with, for instance, the platforms used by op centers from the carriers. But we also know that there are ports that are not that advanced. Ports, terminals, and carriers in general that are not that advanced. So for that, you may want to rely, for the time being, at least on ADI as a means of connection. So yes, it is immensely helpful if we're all on the same level, and no, because we know we're not all on the same level, and it just takes time to get everyone there. And in the meantime, it is okay to use something else as long as it allows you to interconnect. That's the main thing.
Yeah. What we may allow me one more comment. What we also found in the past, at least as feedback, as DCSA is still a young organization, we also believe that standards or having standards is supporting solution providers in developing platforms, because they can they have a larger base where they can sell that platform on that if it is supporting a standard. So that could also be, let's say, an accelerator for this. In the end, it needs a digital infrastructure to exchange this information, and this requires systems to be built and operated.
Okay, great. We'll probably have time for one more question. I think I'll direct this one to Henning. What else is DCSA working on in terms of initiatives and standards?
How much time do we have, Ellen? No, yeah, I think so we are working actually on the whole area of containerized shipping. In addition, and then maybe most closely connected to this piece is our IoT project, which is looking into smart container tracking devices and how to standardize those. And it really covers all aspects of these solutions. We started with standards on connectivity. So how do we avoid, because the boxes are moving, so it's unfortunately not as easy as a smart home. You always have power supply and you always have network. You just need to connect the device once to your Wi-Fi and then you're done. The container is moving around and you need connectivity on any place in the world, and especially also on any vessel. And getting connectivity within a metal container or within a metal box like a vessel can be quite challenging. But we also believe that this requires standards so that we can really harvest all the benefits of the data elements which are produced by these devices. There's another initiative, completely different area, which is looking into standardization of documentation, or electronic bill of lading is probably the keyword that we need to highlight here. This is the first element, but in the end we are trying to reach a state where we don't require paper anymore in global container shipping. This is of course also a multi-year effort, and it comes with a lot of challenges, from legal challenges to IT challenges to system interoperability. And we also have the groundwork projects, which look into processes, language, and in the end, an age which is beyond today's EDI-based exchange of information, because we believe that this is, it has been, let's say, the working horse for the last 30 years, but we don't think it will last 30 more years. So we will have to replace that with real-time interactions going forward. And as this is a huge endeavor to really not only set it up, implement the first connections, but also fully transfer the existing connections to a new technology, we believe we need to start now and push it forward with full speed, so that maybe in 5 years from now, we can say, well, we have 50 or 80% on APIs and not on EDI anymore.
Okay, I actually have one more question that is related to the roadmap. Is DCSA looking to consider intermodal, such as rail, air, truck, and also general cargo and bulk?
Maybe I take the intermodal part, and Marcel can answer the general cargo, bulk, tanker, cruise ship part, because that is related back again to just-in-time arrival. So everything that we do, we try to come up with standards that work intermodal, as long as we focus on the container. So what we don't look is at parcel level. For parcel level, we are engaged, for instance, with GS1, organizations like GS1, so that at least we provide the required output for shippers. However, the standards we publish as DCSA will always be connected to the transport of a container. However, it doesn't stop in the port. So it always includes barge, rail, truck as the pieces. So you will see that in our track and trace standards, for instance, that we try to, wherever possible, come up with intermodal definitions. And we have air in here. So air is the only one. So the containers that we ship are not usually transported by airplanes. So this is probably where we will always see differences, at least how we see it right now.
Yeah, albeit we do work for IoT, we work with IATA as well, trying to, at the very least, to be as aligned as we can. with them. So taking over, Henning, with regard to let's say other users of ports, be it bulk, liquid, or cruise ships, or what have you got. And I think I'm going to echo Henning there. At the end of the day, we represent carriers and not cruise ships. But we do know that we use the same ecosystem, in this case, ports and terminals. So what we have in mind is that we first work with our members and the terminals and the ports, and also then reach out to other large organizations. But I'm slightly worried that if we start with everyone on a global scale, it's never going to work. It's too much. It's too big. So even on the global scale, we will narrow the scope to the carriers and the ports and the terminals before we move on to the other stakeholders in the port ecosystem.
Marcel, would it be fair to say that if we are successful with setting up a standard for just-in-time, this is likely to be easily adjusted to also serve tankers, bulk, or other type of vessels?
Without being an expert in those other types of vessels, at the very least easier than without a standard, obviously. And there will be differences when you go into the details because of priority given to a specific type, size, whatever. And that actually might also allow us to change some of the things that we're doing to take into consideration that there are those differences. In general, I say, yeah, it's easier. The extent to which it is easier, we need to go out and find out.
All right, I think with that, we are pretty much on time, and we want to thank everyone for joining. And we hope that you will also keep in touch, check out our social media, LinkedIn, that we promote these kind of webinars in the future, and also subscribe to our updates. With that, I think we can say goodbye.
Thank you all.
Yeah, many thanks for attending, and yeah, fill out the survey and like us on LinkedIn. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Bye.